The latest AAA games have been half finished, filled to the brim with bugs, and overall have just had bad releases. Every year, publishers promise to release the next big thing, and every year it just seems that more and more people are disappointed. So based on what I just said, it would seem that gaming is slowly dying. Well, that couldn't be further from the truth, and I'll explain why. So let's start with AAA games and the multiple roots of the problem. First up, we got publishers hyping up the games they release to be the next big thing. This isn't a new thing by any means though. Publishers have always hyped up their games. Let's just go into a history of a few games that were hyped up just to fall flat on its face. Duke Nukem is a hugely popular series, so when Duke Nukem Forever was announced after 15 years of development, you can imagine the hype was through the roof. Well, too bad it flopped pretty hard. Not just in terms of sales, but also in terms of the game itself. The gameplay was iffy at best, and no one really seemed to like it that much.
Okay, I think that's enough. This game sucks.
And if you want to bring up the argument that old games didn't have this problem, let's go 20 years back to Daikatana. John Romero was the lead designer of the original Doom. He left the Doom team and went on to start his own company, and took up 2-page ads in gaming magazines. Mind you, this is in the late 90s where magazines were a huge source of info and the internet wasn't even close to as big as it is now. So the game drops in 2000 and it's terrible. The reviews were just bad, all bad. Still not old enough for you? Let's go 40 years back to 1982 when the E.T. game dropped on the Atari. There's a ton of videos on this game and how it failed, but long story short, Atari wanted to ride on the E.T. movie's success, so they paid Howard Scott Warshaw $200K plus a trip to Hawaii to make a whole game in just 5 weeks. And what happened was millions of copies went unsold, which cost Atari millions upon millions of dollars. And not only that, but Atari had spent $22 million to get the rights for E.T. So as you can see, hyping up games just for them to flop isn't new to the gaming industry. It's been there from pretty much the start. The only issue is now we live in a world of social media. With social media, information spreads faster than ever, and more importantly, opinions can be shared a lot more easily. Now in this era where anyone from 5 years old to 130 years old can use social media and share their thoughts, games get hyped up at a higher volume and at a faster pace. And since opinions are so easily and quickly shared, games are built up quick but can also be destroyed just as fast. It can go from, wow, this game looks amazing, this game's gonna be the next big thing, to, this is the worst game I've ever played. Don't play this game, it's terrible, it's awful, worst game ever. And while I will admit that AAA publishers have recently been rushing games a lot more frequently than in the past, which results in a lot of half-finished and bugged out games, it's not a new thing. It's always happened, but the problem is just put under a microscope by social media and how fast info can spread on the internet. The next thing I want to talk about is about how games aren't necessarily declining. I think they've just hit a bit of a plateau recently. This doesn't apply to every series because some have generally just gotten worse, but I feel that a lot of game series have just hit a plateau. AAA games are scared to take risks, and honestly I can kind of see why. With just one bad release, the whole development team will forever be tainted by that one bad release. I mean, just look at No Man's Sky. We all know about its horrendous release, but we also know that the game is actually really good now. But the problem is, No Man's Sky will probably never recover from that nightmare of a launch. And it really sucks because you can tell the developers have a lot of passion and love for the game, but they were just forced into releasing a half-finished game thanks to the publishers. So using No Man's Sky as an example, I completely understand why AAA publishers are afraid to take that risk. No Man's Sky took a risk to make an amazing game, and it originally had flopped. Sure, it's great now, but there are so many people that won't play it because of that release. On the flip side, let's talk about games that took a risk successfully. You guys know about this game series called Halo? Yeah, it was one of the first games to come out on the original Xbox. To make a game for a brand new console that had not been tested was a pretty big risk. And keep in mind, Halo hadn't been an established, beloved series yet. This was the very first game in the series. So if this original Halo game had been bad, I almost guarantee you that the series would just not be as big as it is now. So Halo took that risk, and now it's one of the biggest FPS series of all time. While I completely understand why it could be better for a company to just play it safe and stick to what works, I do wish more AAA publishers would get out of their comfort zone a little bit and allow the devs to take some more risks. On the topic of not taking risks, let's talk about how little innovation there has been in the AAA gaming scene. There's an argument for both sides here, but I will say that one side has a much better case. You see this a lot in sports games specifically, but this still applies for a lot of AAA games. And honestly, I think that the core reason for it is the lack of competition and hunger. For sports games in particular, it's because of a lack of competition, which is kind of ironic considering sports are really competitive by nature. So let's take a look at the Madden series. In 2004, EA signed a deal with the NFL that basically made it so EA was the only company to make NFL licensed games. And for a few years, they made great games like Madden 08, but as the years went on, the game slowly got worse and worse every year. This is most likely due to EA realizing that if people want an NFL game, they're going to be forced to buy their game. And since Madden 12, there haven't really been any great Madden games. I mean, sure, there were some decent ones, but there was nothing really close to the earlier Maddens. Oh, but Joel, the deal was in 2004. Surely they already knew that people would be forced into buying their games earlier. If they already knew, how come the game quality didn't decline earlier? Well, that brings me to my second point about hunger. EA was still hungry to prove themselves as a company that can make amazing football games. But what did they have to prove? That they were better than 2K. Now, when you think of football games, 2K probably isn't the first company that comes to mind. When you think of 2K, you probably think of the basketball games. But they did make one of the best football games ever, NFL 2K5. 2K5 was the last football game that 2K could put out, and it was amazing. People loved it. EA was hungry to put out something that fans could be happy with, something that would keep them wanting to come back to buy the new Madden every year. And that's exactly what EA did. In a 3-year streak, they created 3 amazing football games with each one arguably better than the last. EA had built a fan base that would keep coming back. And once they had that established fan base, they wouldn't need to innovate or improve anymore. The fans would come back for a new Madden every year regardless of if it was bad or not. And you really see this in Madden 12. Madden 12 was great, and everything after Madden 12 just started to slowly decline. And if you look at the newest Madden, yeah, it's really bad. EA had no competition, so there was really no point in having to put in the work to make it great games if the fans were going to buy it anyways. As a matter of fact, if EA never signed the deal, I'm like 99% sure that there would have been so much competition that it would have forced EA to keep innovating and improving. But there's no competition, and that hunger to make a better game is lost. And I can see the argument for people saying that it's hard to improve and innovate something that has almost reached its ceiling like Madden 08. And you know what? That's a completely valid argument, but that's not the case here. With Madden, they have quite literally gotten worse and even taken out features. If they just kind of plateaued, it wouldn't have been a big deal since the games are already great, so it's fine if they plateau, the games are just going to keep being great. But we're literally talking about a series going downwards in quality. And it's not just sports games that do this. AAA publishers know that people are going to buy the games regardless, so they won't need to put out a quality game. They can put out like a decent game or just an average okay game, and people are still going to buy it. And honestly, it's not really like we can do anything about it right now because we can't necessarily just get every single person to start pre-ordering games and buying games on day one. So it sucks, but honestly, I don't see a way to get publishers to realize that people would probably rather have a game delayed for a year rather than have a game released now but be riddled with bugs and half finished. This isn't all the publisher's fault though. Let's talk about the players. There's a huge group of people that will pre-order games without fail every single time a game looks even remotely interesting, without realizing that they're part of the problem when it comes to publishers releasing half-finished games. The publishers notice the pattern. They see that they're already making sales and the game hasn't even come out yet. I mean, just look at Cyberpunk 2077. The game was making profits before it even released, and we all know how Cyberpunk's release went. Cyberpunk is kind of an extreme example because it was hyped up for pretty much a whole decade, but it still gets my message across. Publishers notice that they're already making money before the game even releases, and pre-orders can be a pretty good benchmark for day one sales. Day one sales are pretty much always going to be higher, so the publishers can expect more and more money from just day one. Now, if people stop pre-ordering games that haven't been proven to be good yet, I feel like publishers would definitely be a little bit more cautious about when they decide to release games. So I've been pretty negative for just about this whole video, but it's time to be positive now and talk about why this narrative about how gaming is dying is just not true. Let's talk about indie games. I know I'm kind of beating a dead horse because everyone against the gaming is dying narrative always says, gaming isn't dying, you're just not playing the right game. Which, I'm not gonna lie, it's definitely true for a lot of people who just play the same games all day and complain that gaming has gotten boring. Indie games have always gone under the radar to the mainstream audience, so they don't really end up playing those games. And I feel that the mainstream audience is the loudest when they push the gaming is dying narrative. And I definitely feel like if they tried out the most popular indie titles like Hollow Knight, Binding of Isaac, Stardew Valley, and others like that, I'm like 90% sure they would probably change their minds about how gaming is done. And I know those aren't necessarily the most recent of titles, so if you want to talk about new titles that are amazing just to show that gaming isn't dying, I got you. Dave the Diver, which just came out less than a month ago, currently has a 97% user review rating on Steam and a 3.9 out of 5 star rating on Backlogged, which is relatively difficult to do actually. Vampire Survivors came out close to a year ago and has a 98% on Steam and a 3.7 on Backlogged. Pizza Tower came out just a few months ago and has a 98% on Steam and a 4.4 star rating on Backlogged. Road Warden with a 96% on Steam and a 3.9 on Backlogged. Now I know Steam and Backlogged reviews aren't necessarily the best way to review how great a game is, but it gives a really good idea. And honestly, you can probably just ask anyone who's played those games, they probably love them. There's a ton of indie games out there that you could try out if you haven't and delve deeper into the world of gaming. And not only are a lot of indie games great, there's a huge catalog of them since they don't need the backing of a huge company to create and release their game. So it's just natural that more indie games are going to be out compared to huge AAA titles. You have more to work with, so go crazy. Now don't get me wrong, not every indie game you pick up is going to be a life-changing, amazing game, but I do feel like if you pick something up that looks interesting to you, you'll probably like it. And by the way, this isn't me trying to say, you need to play indie games now and expand your taste in gaming, or else you'll never truly enjoy video games. What I will say is though, that the brain does get less excited about things when you've seen it a lot. If you found that gaming has gotten stale and you tend to play the same type of games, I encourage you to venture out and try different types of games. If you play a lot of FPS games, then maybe try JRPG like Chrono Trigger, the Legend of Heroes series, or the Final Fantasy series. However, if you're happy with the games you play, then good on you. Keep doing what makes you happy, and you don't have to listen to me. I'm just a dude on the internet spewing thoughts for people to listen to. On the topic of indie games, let's talk about what indie games are doing that AAA games aren't doing. I want to talk about how hungry indie game devs are. I was talking about hunger earlier when I was on the topic of sports games, and I think it applies perfectly to indie games. They just want to go out there and make a good game that consumers will actually enjoy. For every indie game I've either seen on YouTube or just spoken to, they all seem to have this quality game over profits mindset. Obviously they want to make profits because who doesn't like money? But they do know that if a game isn't good, it's probably not going to make money in the first place. They're forced into making a good game in order to make money. Compare that to established AAA series where they don't necessarily have to make a great game to make profit. Like I said earlier about pre-ordering, companies can literally make a profit before the game even releases in some cases. This is why you tend to see a lot of indie games with higher overall reviews compared to AAA games. The devs have a vision and that hunger to make a good game, and they just go for it, even if it's a little risky. A huge thing I think a lot of people undervalue is how indie devs and publishers treat the consumer. You know when you're shopping at a grocery store and the machine says, "Welcome, valued customer," but you know they don't really care about you, you're just a number to them. Well, with indie games, I often do get the vibe of, "Welcome, valued customer." Indie devs and publishers really care about their game and the people that buy them. Oftentimes, it's not a guarantee for them that the game is going to do well financially, so they first have to make the game good and also be likable so that customers come back. And it's not to say that all AAA publishers are evil and don't care about their customers, but you just see it a lot more in indie games as compared to AAA games. Another thing that allows indie games to be made with such care is the fact that they don't have a huge mega publisher breathing down their neck telling them when to release the game. It's not the most surefire way to make money, but self-publishing games allows devs to work at their own schedule and they don't have to worry about their game being greenlit by a publisher that doesn't want to take a risk on their game. So do take what I'm about to say with not just a grain of salt, but like a whole handful of salt. I'm just going to go under the assumption that indie publishers are probably a bit more understanding of devs and they probably want the best version of the games to be released. This means that they probably won't want half-finished games to be released like we've seen recently. Next, I want to talk about burnout because I feel like a lot of people can relate. This section is going to be a little bit shorter because I feel like I don't have that much to say on it that probably has already been said. So when COVID hit, everyone was inside, and for most gamers that meant they were probably just spending most of the day playing games all day, every day for pretty much a year, give or take a few months depending on where you lived. And it's just natural that you're going to get burnout of something if you do it all day, every day. So by the time this narrative started getting more and more popular, COVID had pretty much ended and a lot of people were burnt out. So as people enjoy games less and less at the same time, all those same people all started to say that gaming is dying without realizing it's not actually dying, but it was most likely just them being burnt out. Now that's not to say that none of the blame goes to publishers who kept milking IPs. The biggest culprit I think of immediately is Call of Duty. And don't get me wrong, I do like a lot of the Call of Duty games, especially the campaigns, but let's be honest, I feel like it's just been a bit too much recently. Too many games in too short of a time frame. When publishers start milking their IPs, it almost never goes well because people start to realize, hey, I'm just kind of playing the same thing over and over again, just in a different font. Games got stale as publishers started milking IPs without switching it up a bit, and this does go back to what I was saying earlier about taking risks. The publishers don't take risks, so the games get more and more stale with each release. So yes, it is partially the publisher's fault, but it also doesn't help that most gamers are probably burnt out as is. I will say though, you don't see this kind of milking in the indie scene. Sure, there are some series with a few titles to their name, but I rarely if ever see any that have been milked as hard as a lot of AAA series. And let's be real, gaming is just way too big of an industry to die. The amount of games that are on the market that still make money is insane. Skyrim is still making money after over a decade of it being released. In 2022, the gaming industry bought in $220 billion. And with scummy microtransactions in so many games now, that number is probably just going to keep getting higher and higher. So let's face it, unless all of gaming just randomly shuts down for some random reason, the gaming industry is just not going to die anytime soon. So yes, you can say gaming is dying, but only to a certain extent. And even then, I feel like it's a really big stretch because it's definitely not dying if you look at the entire game industry rather than just the AAA scene. Now, I did talk bad about a lot of AAA publishers and games in this video, but they're not all bad, and there have been amazing AAA titles recently. And not only have there been a lot of great AAA titles, but indie games have been consistently dropping banger after banger, year after year. So let's stop pushing the gaming is dying message.
Where are you going? You're lost?
In life, there's roadblocks.
Ole mole.